Welcome back to EPCM Project Academy and our EPCM Insights.
Today,
We're diving deep into a real-world case study.
applying ACE International Recommended Practice 60R10.
That's right.
This one's perfect for all you project controls professionals out there.
We're going to walk through how to develop a solid project controls plan.
Using a mining expansion project as our example,
We're going beyond just theory here.
we're going to dissect a detailed project controls plan,
For a mining expansion,
using RP 60R10 as our guide.
okay,
So imagine this.
a challenging mining expansion project in a remote location.
What comes to mind?
When you think about keeping a project like that on track,
We've got to consider a lot of factors.
things like limited access to skilled labor,
Strict environmental regulation.
the fluctuating prices of commodities.
It's a recipe for complexity.
And that's precisely why a robust project controls plan is essential in this scenario.
Makes sense.
It's like having a detailed roadmap.
We're navigating through a jungle.
Exactly.
And the document we're diving into today
Project controls plan for a mining expansion project
provides a fantastic blueprint.
for how to develop that roadmap.
It uses a hypothetical project as a case study.
To show how to put the principles of RP60R10 into action.
Got it.
So before we jump into the nitty-gritty
Can you give us a quick overview?
of this hypothetical mining project,
What are they trying to achieve?
here,
The project involves expanding iron ore production.
at an existing mine.
They're aiming for a 50% increase in production capacity.
To do this,
They need to build a new processing plant
expand the existing mine pit,
and upgrade all the associated infrastructure.
rail lines.
The whole works.
Wow.
That's a massive undertaking.
And I bet the remote location adds another layer of complexity.
Absolutely.
The document highlights how factors like the remote location,
The shortage of skilled labor and materials,
the stringent environmental regulations,
and the volatility of commodity prices,
all of these can really throw a wrench in your plans.
if you're not careful.
So let's start unpacking this project controls plan.
What are the key elements that really stand out?
Yeah,
The first thing that jumps out is the importance of clarity.
right from the start.
The plan lays out a very clear mission statement.
To provide timely, accurate, and reliable project control information to support effective decision-making and ensure the safe, efficient, and profitable expansion of the mine. They're not just saying we need a project controls plan.
They're defining the WHY behind it.
Right.
They're emphasizing that the goal is to provide the right information at the right time to support good decisions and ultimately ensure project success.
And they're specifically calling out safety,
Efficiency and profitability.
all critical for a high-stakes project like this.
That mission statement sets the tone for everything that follows.
What else is crucial in these initial stages? Let's
On.
start.
You've got multiple stakeholders involved.
The mining company,
The engineering firm.
the contractor.
There's so many players.
It's vital to establish clear lines of authority.
Who's calling the shots in this case?
The plan establishes a project steering committee to make the big decisions,
This committee includes representatives from all the major stakeholders.
ensuring everyone has a voice at the table.
That makes sense?
You need a central decision-making body.
To keep things moving smoothly and avoid conflicts down the line.
Exactly.
And to make sure everyone stays on the same page.
The plan emphasizes that compliance with the project controls plan is mandatory for everyone involved,
They even have a dedicated project controls manager
whose job is to monitor compliance.
and make sure things are running according to plan.
So,
You're saying they're not just creating this plan and letting it gather dust on a shelf.
right.
They're building in mechanisms to enforce it,
Think of the project controls manager as the guardian of the plan.
making sure everyone follows the playbook.
So what happens when
And let's be realistic.
it's bound to happen at some point?
Changes need to be made to the plan.
How do they handle that?
That's where revision control comes in.
The plan has a formal change management process,
Any changes need to be documented
reviewed.
and then approved by that project steering committee we talked about,
This keeps things transparent and organized.
even when adjustments are needed.
It sounds like they're really building in accountability at every level.
Absolutely.
They're recognizing that a project controls plan is a living document.
It needs to be adaptable while still maintaining control.
And to manage all of these functions effectively.
The plan establishes a dedicated project controls team,
So we're talking about a team.
solely focused on project controls.
You bet.
What kind of expertise does this team bring to the table?
They've got cost engineers to manage the budget,
Planners and schedulers to keep things on track.
document controllers to manage all the paperwork.
Even a risk management specialist to identify and mitigate potential problems.
It's a pretty comprehensive team structure
It sounds like they're leaving no stone unturned.
when it comes to managing this project.
So we've got the general requirements down.
Now let's dive into the heart of the plan.
How do they actually apply project controls in this challenging environment?
That's where it gets really interesting.
The plan breaks down the functional applications of project controls,
In various stages.
starting with the foundation.
Project planning.
Okay.
So let's talk planning.
What are the key things they need to nail down in this initial phase?
First and foremost,
They need to define the project scope and the execution strategy,
this means getting crystal clear on exactly what they're building
how they're going to build it.
and what the deliverables are,
I imagine that's especially important in this remote location.
where surprises can be costly.
Absolutely.
The document stresses the importance of having a clearly defined scope.
Spelled out in all the contract documents
Right.
and specifications.
You don't want any ambiguity creeping in and causing problems down the line,
Right.
because miscommunication can lead to delays
Budget overruns.
and all sorts of headaches.
So how do they approach the execution strategy?
For this mining expansion,
They're taking a phased approach.
starting with detailed engineering
Then moving on to procurement.
and finally tackling the construction activities.
This allows for better control and flexibility as they go.
I see.
And I'm guessing that remote location plays a big role in shaping that strategy.
You got it.
The document mentions that they're considering incorporating modular construction and prefabrication.
By building components off-site and then transporting them to the location.
They can minimize the amount of work that needs to be done in that challenging environment.
That's a smart way to adapt to the circumstances,
It's like bringing the factory to the project site.
rather than trying to build everything from scratch in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly.
It's all about finding ways to mitigate those risks and challenges associated with the remote location. They've got the scope defined.
The execution strategy in place.
What's the next step in this planning phase? You've got this
Yeah.
massive project.
How do you make it manageable?
You break it down, right?
That's where control account development comes in.
Okay, so control accounts.
Can you give us a quick refresher?
On what those are and why they're so important.
Think of it like this.
You're baking a cake?
You wouldn't just throw all the ingredients in a bowl and hope for the best.
You'd break down the recipe into steps, right?
Mixing the dry ingredients.
Creaming the butter and sugar.
So on.
Each of those steps is like a control account.
A mini project within the larger project.
Ah.
That's a great analogy.
So in this mining project,
What would some of the control accounts be?
they'd likely establish control accounts for major work packages.
Things like the new processing plant,
The mine pit
the
expansion.
infrastructure upgrades,
Each control account has its own budget
schedule.
and deliverables.
Makes perfect sense.
It's like dividing a giant puzzle
Into smaller.
for manageable sections.
Right.
And by tracking cost and schedule performance at the control account level.
They get a much clearer picture of how the project is progressing overall.
Okay.
So they've broken down the project into control accounts. Now, how do they actually go about creating the schedule and cost plans?
For each of these mini projects,
For scheduling.
they're advocating for the good old critical path method.
Or CPM,
This helps them identify the most critical activities.
those that directly impact the project's completion date.
Ah, yes.
CPM.
A classic project management technique.
I imagine is particularly useful in a complex project like this.
Absolutely.
And in this case,
The schedule needs to factor in all sorts of variables.
lead times for procuring materials and equipment,
Logistics of mobilizing the workforce,
even things like seasonal weather patterns.
which can have a big impact in a remote location.
It's like a giant
Intricate puzzle.
where every piece needs to fit perfectly.
What about the costs side of things?
How do they go about estimating the costs for a project of this scale?
They'll need to use a combination of techniques,
Things like parametric estimating
which uses historical data to develop cost models,
or detailed quantity takeoffs.
where they actually measure and calculate the quantities of materials needed.
The key is to consider all the relevant factors,
Market prices for commodities,
regional labor rates,
and those often significant transportation costs for getting everything to this remote site.
and I'm guessing contingencies are built into the cost estimates as well.
Because, as we've established,
You bet.
surprises are almost inevitable in this kind of project.
Contingencies are essential for accounting for those unforeseen risks,
Things that you can't necessarily plan for,
but need to be prepared for.
right?
So we've got the schedule and cost plans figured out.
What about the resources needed to actually execute the work?
How do they approach resource planning?
Resource planning is another crucial piece of the puzzle.
They need a detailed plan that covers labor and
Equipment.
materials.
And I imagine that labor management is particularly tricky.
Given that shortage of skilled labor we talked about earlier,
You're absolutely right.
the document acknowledges that challenge.
And suggests a proactive approach.
Their labor management plan should assess the availability of skilled labor.
And potentially incorporate training and development programs to bridge any skills gaps.
So they're not just hoping for the best.
They're actively planning for that potential shortage.
Exactly.
And that proactivity extends to equipment management as well.
They need to choose equipment that can handle the tough mining environment.
And develop a robust maintenance plan to prevent costly downtime.
Imagine a key piece of equipment breaking down in that remote location.
It could bring the whole project to a screeching halt.
That's definitely a scenario you want to avoid.
And what about procuring all the materials and equipment they'll need,
Procurement planning is another big one.
especially in a remote location?
They need to consider lead times for ordering major equipment,
The complexities of transporting materials to the site.
and even the process for selecting qualified vendors and subcontractors.
It sounds like they're orchestrating a very complex symphony of activities here.
They are.
And it's not just about getting things delivered on time.
It's also about being smart with costs.
That's where value analysis and engineering come into play.
Yeah.
The quest for efficiency.
How do they weave value analysis into the project planning stage?
They propose conducting value engineering workshops during the design phase.
These workshops bring together experts from different disciplines,
Engineers,
designers,
procurement specialists.
to brainstorm ideas for optimizing costs without sacrificing quality or functionality.
So it's not about cutting corners.
It's about finding smarter ways to do things.
What kinds of ideas might come out of those workshops?
Well,
They might explore using alternative materials
finding ways to streamline the process flow in that new processing plant.
or identifying opportunities to minimize waste throughout the project.
It's all about getting the most bang for their buck.
That sounds like a very collaborative and creative approach to cost optimization.
But even with the most meticulous planning,
Risks are inevitable.
especially in a mining project,
How do they tackle risk management?
risk management is a major focus of this plan.
They stress the importance of developing a comprehensive risk management plan.
To identify
Assess.
and mitigate potential risks. So let's break that down.
What are some of the key risks they'd be looking at in this context?
Think about it.
Mining is a high-risk industry.
You've got geotechnical risks like unstable ground conditions,
Environmental risks like spills or dust emissions,
safety risks associated with operating heavy equipment,
and even risks related to community relations.
especially if the project impacts local communities.
It's a pretty daunting list of potential hazards.
It is.
And to assess the potential impact of these risks,
Not just identify them.
but really understand how they could affect the project.
They suggest using quantitative risk analysis techniques.
Things like Monte Carlo simulation.
This allows them to model different risk scenarios.
And see how those risks might impact the project's cost and schedule.
So it's not just about saying, okay, this risk might happen.
It's about quantifying the potential impact so they can plan accordingly. It's a much more proactive approach to risk management.
And it can save a lot of headaches down the road.
We've covered a lot of ground here.
From defining the scope to managing risks.
What's next in this journey through the project controls plan?
Now that we've laid the groundwork with planning,
Let's shift our focus to the next critical phase.
project performance measurement,
So this is where we move from planning to action, right?
where we start tracking how the project is actually progressing.
Against all those carefully laid plans.
Exactly.
And that's what we'll be diving into next.
That's right. Project performance measurement is where we see if all that careful planning is paying off. It's about keeping your finger on the pulse of the project and making sure you're staying on track.
Okay, so how do they approach project performance measurement in this mining case study? What are the key things they're focusing on?
Well, the first step is accurate project cost accounting. They emphasize developing a detailed cost breakdown structure, or CBS.
A cost breakdown structure. Can you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah.
What exactly is a CDS and why is it so important? Think of the CBS as a map of your project's costs. It breaks down the total budget into smaller, more manageable pieces, aligning with the work breakdown structure. This allows you to track actual costs against the budget at a very granular level, so you can quickly spot any potential overruns.
So if they see costs creeping up in a particular area, they can investigate and take corrective action before it becomes a major problem.
Exactly. It's all about early detection and proactive management. And it's not just about tracking costs. It's also about measuring progress.
Right, because knowing how much you're spending is only half the picture. You need to know how much work is actually getting done.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They propose using a combination of methods to track progress. Think about things like units completed, how many feet of pipe have been laid, how many tons of concrete have been poured. That gives you a very tangible measure of progress.
Right, you can actually see the project taking shape. What other methods do they use?
They also use incremental milestones, key points in the project that signify progress. For example, the completion of a major design review or the delivery of a critical piece of equipment. And they also track progress based on the level of effort. Basically, how many labor hours have been expended on a particular task.
So they're using multiple methods to get a well-rounded view of progress, but how do they know that the information they're getting is accurate? I mean, especially in a remote location, it's not always easy to verify what's actually happening on the ground.
That's a great point. To ensure accuracy, they plan to conduct regular site inspections and progress meetings. You need to have boots on the ground to see firsthand how things are going and to talk to the people who are actually doing the work.
It's like the old saying, trust but verify. You need that ground truth to make informed decisions.
Absolutely. And once you've got a handle on your cost and progress data, you can move into the next stage, project performance assessment.
Okay, so we're moving from measuring to evaluating. What are the key tools and techniques they use for project performance assessment in this mining case study?
This is where earned value management, or EVM, comes into play.
Ah, yes. EVM. It seems like every project controls professional I talk to swears by EVM. But for those who might not be as familiar, can you give us a quick overview of what EVM is and why it's so powerful?
EVM is a methodology that integrates cost, schedule, and work scope to give you a comprehensive view of project performance. Instead of just looking at whether you're on budget or on schedule in isolation, EVM allows you to see how these factors are interrelated.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does it actually work in practice? Can you give us an example?
Sure. Let's say you're installing a pipeline. You've planned to install 1,000 feet of pipe this week, and you've budgeted $10,000 for that work. At the end of the week, you've only installed 800 feet of pipe, but you've already spent $9,000. Just looking at those numbers in isolation, you might think, well, we're a little behind schedule, but we're still under budget.
Right, so on the surface, it might not seem too bad.
But EVM gives you a deeper insight by calculating earned value. Basically, the value of the work that's actually been completed. You can see that you're actually behind schedule A&D over budget.
So even though you haven't spent all the money yet, you're not getting the value for the money you have spent.
Exactly, and that's the power of EVM. It gives you those early warning signs so you can take corrective action before small problems snowball into major issues.
So EVM helps you see the forest, A&D, the trees, the big picture, and the details.
That's a great way to put it. And in this mining case study, they specifically recommend using EVM metrics like the Schedule Performance Index, or SPI, and the Cost Performance Index, or CPI. These metrics give you a clear indication of whether you're on track ahead or behind on both schedule and cost.
Okay, so if the SPI is less than 1, you're behind schedule, and if the CPI is less than 1, you're over budget.
You got it. Those simple metrics provide a powerful snapshot of project health. And beyond just looking at historical data, they also emphasize the importance of regular forecasting.
Forecasting. That's like looking into the crystal ball and predicting the future of the project, right?
Exactly. By analyzing historical performance, current trends, and those potential risks we talked about earlier, you can generate forecasts that predict the project's estimate at completion, or EAC, and the schedule at completion, or SA.
So they're not just looking at where they are, they're trying to anticipate where they're going.
Right. Forecasting helps you proactively manage the project. You can see potential problems on the horizon and make adjustments before they turn into major crises.
It's like having a heads up on what's coming your way so you can prepare for it. But even with the best forecasting, changes are inevitable in any project. How does this plan handle change management?
Change management is absolutely critical in a complex project like this. The plan establishes a formal change management process to control changes to the scope, schedule, and budget.
So no more scope creep or budget blowouts without a thorough review process. Tell me more about how that works.
It all starts with a formal change request. Anyone proposing a change to the project needs to document it. What are they changing? Why are they changing it? And what impact will it have on the scope, schedule, and budget?
So they're not just saying, hey, can we add this feature? They need to justify the change and provide all the details.
Exactly. That change request is then reviewed and assessed by the project controls team, those experts we talked about earlier. to determine the impact on the project.
So they're looking at the ripple effects. How will this change affect everything else?
Precisely. And if the change is deemed significant, it goes to the project steering committee for approval. This ensures that all changes are carefully considered and that they align with the overall project objectives.
It sounds like a very controlled process. They're not just reacting to changes as they come up. They're managing them proactively.
That's the goal. And once the project is complete and hopefully successful, just pack up and move on. The plan emphasizes the importance of what they call project historical database management.
So they're talking about capturing the lessons learned so they can do even better on future projects.
Exactly. They propose creating a comprehensive project archive. All the project documents, costs, and schedule data, risk logs, change orders. All of that valuable information is stored and organized so it can be used for future reference.
It's like creating a library of project knowledge.
That's a great analogy. This archive becomes a goldmine for benchmarking future projects, identifying areas for improvement and making sure that those hard-earned lessons aren't forgotten.
It sounds like they're really emphasizing continuous improvement.
They are. It's about recognizing that project controls is an ongoing journey. You're always learning, always evolving.
Okay, we've talked about the functional applications of project controls, planning, measurement, assessment, change management, but what about the technology and processes that underpin all of this?
Oh.
What do they say about systems and data integrity?
That's a crucial aspect of any project controls plan. The systems and data integrity plan is all about making sure you have the right tools and processes in place to manage project information effectively.
So this is where we talk about software data security and all those essential behind-the-scenes elements.
It's exactly. They recommend using integrated project management software. Basically, a software platform that can handle all the key project data. The schedule, costs, resources, documents, all in one place.
So no more working with silos of information. Everything is connected and accessible?
Right. And they emphasize that this software should interface with the company's accounting system to ensure data consistency and make reporting much easier.
That makes a lot of sense. You don't want to be manually transferring data between systems. That's just asking for errors.
Exactly. And of course, in this day and age, data security is paramount. The plan stresses the importance of regular data backups. You don't want to lose all that valuable information.
Right, because data loss can be catastrophic for a project. What else do they recommend for data security?
They advocate for a secure data storage system, one with access controls to make sure that only authorized personnel can view or modify sensitive information.
So it's like having a digital vault for your project data.
That's a great way to think about it. And when it comes to sharing information electronically, because in today's world, projects involve a lot of file sharing. They recommend using secure file transfer protocols. This ensures that data is encrypted and protected from unauthorized access.
So they're taking a very proactive approach to data security, protecting the project information at every stage. What about communication? How do they ensure that everyone involved in the project is on the same page?
The communication plan is all about keeping the lines of communication open and flowing smoothly. They emphasize the importance of regular meetings, clear reporting structures, and a well-organized file system.
Because as we all know, communication breakdowns can be a major source of problems in any project.
Absolutely. They suggest having regular project meetings. Think weekly status meetings, monthly progress reviews, and quarterly risk management meetings. Each type of meeting serves a specific purpose and involves the relevant stakeholders.
So it's a tiered approach to communication, different levels of detail for different audiences.
Right. And in addition to those face-to-face or virtual meetings, they advocate for regular project reports. These reports provide a written record of progress, performance, and forecasts. They're essential for keeping everyone informed and aligned.
What kind of reports are we talking about here? Can you give us some examples?
Sure, they mention things like weekly progress reports, which provide a quick update on what's been accomplished and what challenges have arisen. Monthly cost and schedule reports dive deeper into those financial and scheduling aspects, providing detailed analysis and trends. And then you have quarterly risk reports, which focus on those potential risks and the mitigation strategies in place.
So a nice mix of regular updates and deeper dives into specific areas. And to keep all of this information organized and accessible, because we're talking about a lot of information here, they emphasize the importance of a clear file structure.
Yes, absolutely. They recommend establishing a consistent file naming convention, so you know exactly what each file contains just by looking at the name, and using a central repository with version control. This makes it easy to find the right information, track changes, and avoid those frustrating situations where you're not sure if you're looking at the latest version of a document.
It's all about bringing order to the chaos,
Yeah.
especially in a complex project where you're dealing with thousands of files.
Right. It's about making sure that everyone can access the information they need when they need it.
Okay, we've covered systems, data integrity, communication. What about the actual deliverables of this project controls plan? What are the tangible outputs that demonstrate the plan is in action?
The plan outlines a comprehensive list of deliverables. These are the concrete products of the plan. The documents, reports, and other outputs that provide evidence of effective project control.
So it's not just about having a plan in theory, it's about seeing it come to life in these tangible outputs.
Exactly. They list several key deliverables. You've got the project schedule, of course. That's a fundamental document that outlines the timeline for all the project activities. Then you have the cost estimate, which breaks down the project budget in detail.
Right, those are the core documents that guide the project. What other deliverables do they highlight?
They also mention resource plans for laser equipment and materials. These plans outline how those resources will be allocated and managed throughout the project. Then you have the risk management plan, which details the identified risks and the mitigation strategies for each. And of course, the change management plan, which outlines the process for controlling changes to the project.
So they're covering all the bases, from the big picture to the nitty-gritty details.
They are. And these deliverables aren't just static documents. They evolve throughout the project lifecycle. As the project progresses, new information comes to light. Risks change, and adjustments need to be made.
So it's a dynamic process. They're constantly updating and refining these deliverables to reflect the current state of the project.
All right, and that brings us to the final stage, project controls plan implementation.
Okay, so this is where we go from theory to practice. We've got the plan, we've identified the deliverables. How do they actually put this plan into action?
The first step is a thorough review and validation of the plan. The project steering committee takes another look to make sure the plan aligns with the project objectives and is ready to be rolled out.
So it's a final check to ensure everything is in order before they hit the ground running.
Exactly. Once the plan gets the green light, it's crucial to communicate it effectively to everyone involved. Training programs are essential to make sure that everyone understands the plan, knows how to use the software tools, and is familiar with those all-important EVM techniques.
Training is key. You can have the best plan in the world, but if people don't know how to use it, it's not going to be very effective.
You're absolutely right. And to keep the plan on track, they incorporate periodic audits. These audits are like checkups for the plan. They help assess compliance, identify areas for improvement, and make sure the plan is still relevant and effective as the project evolves.
So they're not just setting it and forgetting it. They're constantly monitoring and adjusting to make sure it's working as intended.
Exactly. It's an iterative process. You learn as you go, you make adjustments, and you constantly strive to improve.
This has been a fascinating journey through the world of project controls, from the initial planning stages all the way through implementation.
It has. And I think it highlights how a well-crafted project controls plan, guided by the principles of RP60R10, can provide the framework for managing even the most complex projects effectively.
Absolutely. And I love how they use this real-world mining project as an example. It makes these concepts much more tangible and relatable.
It does.
Yeah.
And even though we've been talking about a mining project, the principles we've discussed today can be applied across industries and project types.
That's a great point. The fundamentals of project controls are universal. It's all about planning, measuring, assessing, and adjusting.
Exactly. The key is to tailor those principles to your specific context. What works for a mining project in a remote location might need to be adapted for a software development project or a construction project in a bustling city.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to find what works for you and your project.
Right. And that's where the real skill of a project controls professional comes in. Being able to take these principles and apply them in creative and effective ways to achieve project success.
Well said. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about as they tackle their own project control challenges.
I hope so. And remember, the journey of project controls is never truly over. It's about continuous learning, continuous improvement, and a relentless pursuit of excellence.
So we've walked through this detailed project controls plan for a mining project. We use that real-world scenario to illustrate the key points of RP60R10. But here's where it gets really interesting for you as project controls professionals.
So this raises a crucial question. How can you adapt these principles to your own projects?
That's the challenge, right? Every project has its own unique quirks, its own set of constraints and risks.
Exactly. The mining example gives you a solid framework. But the real art of project controls is knowing how to tailor these principles to your specific situation.
So what are some key takeaways our listeners can apply regardless of their industry or project type?
First and foremost, crystal clear communication is non-negotiable. You need to establish a shared understanding of the project goals, the scope, and the constraints from day one.
And that communication needs to continue throughout the entire project lifecycle, not just at the beginning.
Absolutely. Regular meetings, concise reports, and a well-defined file structure, those are all essential tools for keeping everyone on the same page and minimizing misunderstandings.
It's not just about broadcasting information either. It's about actively listening to your team, hearing their concerns, and being open to feedback.
Spot on, fostering that culture of open communication where people feel comfortable speaking up and sharing ideas. That's crucial for proactive problem solving.
Another key takeaway is understanding that there's no magic bullet when it comes to tools and techniques.
Right. You need to select the right tools for the job. Things like EVM, CPM risk analysis techniques. These are all powerful, but they need to be applied thoughtfully.
Don't overcomplicate things if a simpler approach will do. It's about finding the right balance between sophistication and practicality.
Exactly. And finally, remember the project controls is not a static process. It's a dynamic journey.
You need to be constantly monitoring your project, evaluating the data, and making adjustments based on what you're learning along the way.
Embrace that dynamic nature.
Yeah.
Be flexible, and don't be afraid to learn from your mistakes. Those are essential qualities for success in the world of project controls.
Well, I think we've equipped our listeners with plenty to think about as they tackle their own project control challenges.
I hope so. Remember, the principles we've covered can be applied to a wide range of projects. The key is to adapt them to your unique context and never stop learning.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into RP60R10. Don't forget to share this deep dive with your fellow project controls professionals and subscribe for more insights.